Because you personally don't like the Black Panther
Because
Party.
he feels threatened by it.
Yeah, but there's no historical context to that feeling, okay? Like, the difference between the Nazi flag and the Confederate flag is that those were symbols of official oppression.
I feel the exact same way when I see people.
Do you see that?
I see it.
All right.
I feel the exact same way when I see progressives walking around with a hammer and a sickle. Welcome, I'm John Caldera, president of the Independence Institute and your devil's advocate. You might not have read him for a while, but for 14 years he was the editor of the Denver Post, and for about 16 years he was a black man. So I wanted to ask him questions. Greg Moore, thanks for being with us.
John, it's good to be with you again.
All right, so you did a column in The Sun, and you and I have had this conversation over the years a million times privately, so I thought we'd do it here.
Sure.
You said something I've heard you say a million times. You said, I don't hate the cops. I'm afraid of the cops. And you kind of went through a little bit of the history of why, as a black guy, you are afraid. And I mean, you and I have talked about what you tell your daughters, what you do. Help me understand this, because as a white guy, I don't trust the police all the time, but I'm not afraid of the police. Help me.
Yeah. So part of it is just historical context. Growing up as a young black kid in Cleveland, people in the black community were intimately familiar with police abuses, and it was almost like old, oral histories that have been passed down, from street to street to street about how to behave, about what happened to Joe the other night, what happened to so-and-so when they were in custody. So we kind of grew up with the narrative that, it was going to be easy for us to be brutalized if we were in the wrong place at the wrong time. And as I wrote in my column...
And was it realistic?
Yes, it was true. Because you would see Joe come home with a busted eye or a busted lip or a broken arm. And he did. And he
sure wasn't Joe's wife.
No, it was not Joe's wife. And he didn't have that when he went in. And so we grew up knowing that, and nobody believed us outside of our own communities, right? You could never get the kind of attention from the media or from other, legal authorities to investigate or prosecute these people for those abuses.
My image of that is, if you were down in Alabama, I could see that stuff. Detroit, the Northeast, it doesn't register as much.
There's no difference between Alabama and Cleveland or Alabama and Buffalo or Alabama and Chicago. It really has to do with police. Now, look, I'm not demonizing all police. I'm not saying that they're all of the same ilk or anything like that. I think the vast majority of police are pretty cool. I used to cover them. So I knew cops when I was a reporter, when I started out. Had a lot of intimate contact with them. They explained a lot about how they survived in the political environment. But the fact of the matter is that there's some bad apples out there that enjoy brutalizing people, and I think that some of those attitudes have been passed down generationally. Their uncle was a cop, their grandfather was a cop, and they were passing those stories all along. That black people are dangerous, they're super strong, they're impervious to pain, it takes 4 of us to subdue them, all kinds of nonsense, okay? And it's been handed down, and it's been demonstrated. The greatest invention, certainly of the last 15 or 20 years that has changed the entire dynamic around this is cell phones. Yeah. Like, you may not believe my anecdotal stories, you may not believe the bruises that I have or the broken arm or whatever, but it's hard to deny what you see with your own eyes. That's transformed the entire debate and the credibility gap that black people have had when talking about policing in America.
We've all had bad experience with cops.
Not all.
I think. I mean, not
you.
No, I remember, and probably why I'm a bit more sympathetic. Back when
you're sympathetic?
Well, not to you. When I had hair, and I actually had a job, I would work really late at night, and I would drive this, same old cheap old cars that I have now, but it was an old Datsun 210, piece of crap. And I'd be driving home at 2 or 3 in the morning, and I always seemed to get pulled over.
Yeah.
And they'd check me out, and they'd run the plates, and it was like, at first I was like, they probably think I'm some Hispanic guy.
Right.
And I laugh at it. And, after it happened enough times, it's like, what the hell?
Right.
All right. And so, mind you, that's just a tiny little piece.
Right. That's a little taste of being profiled.
But from their point of view, what's this guy doing in this neighborhood at this time? Okay.
That is not justification for stopping somebody, and it certainly is not justification for letting that stop escalate into a situation like what we saw in Atlanta.
Agreed.
So,
Agreed.
so here's the fact of the matter. I think that a lot of cops, when it comes to people of color, they're looking at that as a potential score. Yeah, I'm going to stop that person because, based on what I've been told, probably 9 times out of 10, they have contraband or drugs or they're high or whatever, and I get a collar. Now, one of the examples that I used was driving from Boston to Maine when I used to live in Boston and worked at the Boston Globe, and I had my wife and my son in the car with me. We were going up to Maine, to Vermont for a vacation. My wife and son were asleep in the car. So around midnight, we're driving on a road in New Hampshire. I'm the only car on the road, and I'm driving the speed limit. I'm trying to be careful. I got precious cargo in my car. I'm not trying to get there in 20 minutes, so I'm being careful. And I drive past an abandoned gas station or a closed gas station, but there's a cop sitting there. I see him. I drive by him, and he just slowly rolls out. And I knew that before I even passed him. He slowly rolls out behind me and follows me for about a mile. That's a long time. It's probably, more than 8.46 seconds. But believe me, I was fully aware that this guy was following me. And when he didn't turn off, I just knew. The lights come on, the siren comes on, I pull over, the guy comes over, looks, knocks on my window, asks for my license registration. I give it to him. My wife has already jumped up. My son wakes up, and they're all apprehensive. The guy comes back after a few minutes, 10 minutes, and I ask him, why did you stop me? Because I knew it wasn't for exceeding the speed limit. And, he didn't feel like he owed some black guy an explanation. He just snapped, you were following too close to my vehicle. Like, that's some infuriating stuff.
He was behind.
He was behind me.
Right.
Basically, he was like, screw you.
All right.
And what I said to my wife and what I'll believe to my dying day is that he thought, I see a black guy. He's probably a criminal. I'm going to stop him. And he's shocked when he finds a family. And he's like, uh-oh.
Find a difference with black cops?
No, not that much.
Why not?
Because I think they become like, Stockholm Syndrome hostages. I mean, they become hostage to their culture, that it's more important to protect the blue line. And there's plenty of instances where black cops have witnessed brutalizing of black citizens by white cops, and they toe the line. And you have to, or you become Serpico. You saw the movie Serpico when he told on the cops in his moment of need, when he's like being pinned in the door and a drug dealer's on the other side with a gun, they let him get shot in the face. That's the reality.
Give me some solutions, because I've been hearing it. I don't disagree with it. It's hit a boiling point thanks to cell phones.
Yeah.
And it depends on how you look at this. And what is a solution? And I'm looking for a solution.
Well, I think there are a couple things. One, that there needs to be real penalties for unjustified use of lethal force. The special immunity that police have right now, where they can fire a weapon without fear of prosecution or what have you. Well, nobody should be able to fire a weapon without fear of prosecution. No one. I don't care who you are. And as I've said many, many times, when you have the power of life and death, then you can't afford to be wrong. When you exercise that lethal force. In fact, you have a higher standard to be correct. And as many police officers have started to say, just because you can doesn't mean that you should. So first, you need to have a reexamination of how the law applies to police and the use of lethal force. I think second, you have to have a change in the culture. You have to recruit different people. You have to, break the generational hold on that job. I think third, you have to have different types of training. So for example, in the Denver case, where a mother called the Denver police because her mentally challenged son, Paul Childs, I think you remember the Paul Childs case, he's 12 years old, but, he's hard to handle. And she called the police because he was acting out. When the police come to his house, and I guess he lived in 5 Points, I don't remember, but the police come, and actually they had been to the house before, so they should have known what the situation was. Paul Childs is standing in the door with a butter knife held upside down with the point of the knife facing the floor. the cops tell him, hey, drop the knife, drop the knife. Again, a mentally challenged kid, and he takes one step closer. Now, as I understand police training, if you have a weapon in your hand and you step within a 20-foot perimeter, they have the right to fire, and they did.
I wouldn't use
and
the term.
Killed the kid.
I wouldn't use the term right. And by the way, a case like that.
So training is an issue.
Scares the hell out of me. You've met my son.
Of course.
He has Down syndrome. He could be in that situation. We expect a lot from cops, and they are trained. And so when I see a situation like that, the question is, are they acting up to their training? And the answer usually is yes. Not always. So when it goes to trial and they explain, we train the cops to do this,
right.
They perceive a person who is a danger with a weapon advancing on them. You say the right, but they can have a justifiable shooting
right.
by defending themselves that way. Do you have any sympathy for that?
I
can see in your eyes the answer is no.
No, I don't have any sympathy for that. I mean, I think that if you're facing an assailant, and I've gone through the FBI training course. Okay, in the simulation, I killed a whole bunch of civilians. Okay, because you got to make split-second decisions. You don't know what they have, but I think a well-trained person will behave in that situation completely different than a civilian. If you look at the Atlanta case where the guy was killed last Friday, and think about this, in the face of all the demonstrations that have been happening in America, the increased scrutiny on police and the use of deadly force, that it would still happen, that it could still happen, that you don't think twice about that? A guy running away from you turns around with a weapon that's non-lethal, that in fact probably isn't even that operational since it had already been fired, and then he fires on the guy and hits him twice in the back. What's also interesting in that case is that immediately after the shooting, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation had released a report saying that he had been shot in a struggle over the taser. But once again, the great invention of the 21st century proved that to be a lie.
It also goes down to terminology. So the idea that there's a guy who is not responding to verbal commands, who has a weapon that can incapacitate you, and he can then take your gun and be of a larger danger. No, that I can understand. If your training is, you cannot let that happen. That's very different than what was the case out in Glenwood. The guy's got a gun in his pocket and he's running down the street.
Right.
That shooting still doesn't work. What I'm saying is, it's gray.
It's complicated.
It's complicated.
Let me just say this. It's complicated, but if there were a roster of white men so numerous that you can't even recall their names, that they can fill the front and the back of a T-shirt, we'd be having a different conversation in this country. If it was only one or two or three or four, over a 10-year period, it'd be different. But when a 12-year-old kid playing in a playground can be shot dead within milliseconds of a policeman getting on the scene, not even saying hi to the kid, like, what are you doing? There's something wrong here. And what I'm encouraged about is that, people are beginning to recognize it as the body count rises. And it's just got to stop.
Let me jump into the term body count.
Okay, maybe I shouldn't have said
that.
No.
Because I'm not taking away anything you just said.
Okay.
Of any of that. I think there is a lot of meat to all of that. But when I hear terms like Black Lives Matter, mm-hmm. What I hear is Black Lives Matter. What I see is Black Lives Matter when they're killed by police. Black Lives Matter not nearly as much when they're killed in other crimes, including by other black men. And when you look at the body count, mm-hmm. For a nation of our size, every death is a tragedy. Every wrong shooting needs to be identified. But last weekend in Chicago, more black men were killed by other black men than in years of police abuse or mistreatment. Mm-hmm. It has nothing to do with the culture there. Mm-hmm. But what I'm seeing is, well, wait a second. Can't we have a talk about, do Black Lives matter, or do Black Lives matter only when it's done by cops? So you understand my question?
I do understand it. I think white people just have a hard time being forced to listen to black people. I mean, let me just say, Black Lives Matter does not only apply to police. Black Lives Matter is a declaration across all socioeconomic type circumstances. I know you don't, but I'm telling you
I don't
that.
see hundreds
I'm
of
telling
thousands of
you.
people protesting because blacks are killing blacks. I see hundreds of thousands of people protesting because cops are killing blacks. Am I wrong?
I don't know whether you're right or wrong. I understand what you're saying. What I'm telling you is that when people say Black Lives Matter, it is a declaration. It's not a comparison. It's not a phrase to be used exclusively when applying to police or exclusive to other life. It's not. It's a declaration that, you know what, across this entire spectrum, from educational opportunities to healthcare disparities to access to capital to segregated communities, and believe me, if you know anything about history, if you take a whole bunch of people, I don't care if they're Jewish or if they're white, you know what Italian slums were like back in the day. If you take those people and you put them in one place and you lock them in that border, what do you think is going to happen? It's just like crabs in a barrel.
I want to get to that.
It's like,
but I want to get to the point that
and so it's a broad declaration.
The frustration right now, the media frenzy that is going on, has zippo to do with blacks killing blacks. Can we agree on that? That this feeding frenzy that we're seeing in the media today, the protests, the riots, the marches, there's no marches about the violence going on in by any scale.
Yeah, but let's just
tell me I'm wrong on that.
Okay, you're wrong.
Why?
I'll tell you that you're wrong. Because if you really understand the Black Lives Matter movement, it's multi-generational, it's multiracial, and it is basically attacking every ism that is condoned in this country and breaking down every barrier to progress that people have been living with, marginalized people have been living with for, several centuries, okay?
Then how come I don't hear it? You've made your living in the media. You've been a reporter, you've been an editor. Then why is it that the struggle with the police, this cultural struggle with the police, which deserves this attention, I'll say it again,
yes,
how come that is everywhere?
It was the match. It was what lit the match. The killing of Michael Brown and Ferguson is what lit the match. And if you really look at, sort of what life was like in Ferguson, it wasn't until after he was killed that you found out the discriminatory nature of police practices in Ferguson, Missouri. But not only that, you got a chance to look at the institutional racism that existed in healthcare and in housing and in employment. And it's structural, And like those people were at the boiling point. Yeah, they jumped out in the street. They created a slogan, Black Lives Matter, but they weren't screaming just about police brutality. They were screaming about the structural inequities that locked them into their communities, that blocked them from opportunities, that robbed their children of having the same type of hope that white kids have in this country, and without ever having to think about race. They were really angry.
I get they're really angry.
But I think it's really important for our viewers to understand this. Look, people can agree with me if they want, but they want to sort of set boundaries on the Black Lives Matter movement. They want it to be black, but it ain't. It is the most integrated. It's the most integrated protest movement in American history, and I'm glad to see it. I'm glad to see these young 22-year-old white kids, carrying signs and saying, end racism now and all that. I mean, we're in a different place. And I've had my white friends say, look, I'm tired. We've been having this conversation. I'm really tired of talking about this. I'm like, we haven't been having this conversation. Maybe James Baldwin and those guys were talking about racism and stuff, but not 20-year-old white kids. And that's really, really, really dramatically different.
So being in that camp of somebody who feels like his entire life someone has put a tape over his mouth, opened up his ears, and yelled about racism. And trust me.
I love your imagery.
Trust me, every time you and I go drinking.
I know.
I was born after the Civil Rights Act. An incredibly, incredibly important incredibly important. That was 56 years ago.
Yeah.
All right. And so I've heard this discussion. I've heard the discussion. I've heard the discussion. I've heard we had to have a discussion. I know we have to have a discussion.
Yeah.
Have a discussion. I have frickin' had it with a discussion. I want to end the discussion, which is I want a resolution. And what I hear in whatever the resolution is, is usually a transference of wealth and
a retransference of wealth.
No, a transference of wealth.
No, it's a retransference.
Because I don't believe. Well, we'll get into that.
Well, the first transfer of wealth was slavery. Right?
Slavery and Indians.
That's the first transfer of wealth.
Let me tell you So
reparations is a retransfer of wealth.
And while the Civil War was going on, so that there's a pride we should also have with our history of slavery, that given the time in American history, America took on this issue unlike any other nation in human history.
Right.
We destroyed a nation it was almost gone. And there's something that should be celebrated in that. That doesn't mean Jim Crow makes sense. It doesn't mean any of this, but it should be a recognition. So while my ancestors were starving to death in Italy, there were people here fighting that issue.
Of course.
And I understand the argument. Well, yeah, they came here, they had me, but my white privilege was everything that was built upon that.
Okay.
I've heard it my entire life.
Sure.
And I also see that there are other people who come to this country. One of the statistics that blows my mind is that 80% of first-generation millionaires are immigrants. These are people who don't look like us, don't have the same skin color as us, don't speak our language, don't know our laws, don't know our customs, don't know our people, and given the opportunities that still kind of abound here, are able to do that. They prove that economic mobility is still possible for those who use it, who grab it and run with it. So when I keep getting back to the give me solutions, not conversations. And what I hear is, you guys need to understand. All right, I've had 55 years of people telling me I need to understand. If you want to reform police, I am up for that. Let's go ahead and do it. You want to end police unions? I am more than up for that, because I think that's one of the reasons bad cops, just like bad teachers, stay. But I want to end the conversation. And I believe that there's a whole group out there that wants to prolong this conversation and are so identified with this conversation. And so put me in the group of all those white guys who go, I've had enough. And also, let me say, I feel we've been beaten into submission in that we can't speak. Because if I had a dime for every time I've been called a racist, for my opinions.
I don't throw those terms around.
You don't.
And there's a lot of stuff to unpack in what you said here. But,
have a sip of that. And
I will have a sip of that. But here's the reality. For all the talk and all the exhaustion you have around the so-called conversations you think we've had, y'all still have the power. You control all the levers of power. You haven't given up much.
Wait a second.
No, you haven't.
In a state. In a country that had the black president,
a black president,
where in a city where we have black mayor, before that a black mayor, where we've had black chiefs of police, where we have black editor of the paper, where we now have a gay Jewish governor, where progressives are in charge of all branches of government.
But listen how you talk. A this, a that, a this, a that. Okay? So that's the problem, all right? So let's just go back. Let's see if we can unpack a few things. So one is, most levers of power are controlled by white people. I'm not saying that all white people have that benefit. I mean, class and all that kind of stuff comes into it, but the fact remains what it is. In terms of immigrants coming over here and they become billionaires, or in fact, many of them become CEOs of Fortune 500 companies. That just shows you the pernicious nature of black racism, okay? It does. It just does. It's easier for a Russian immigrant to come over in this country and get a foothold. It's easier for a white Norwegian to come over here. It's easier for a poor Pakistani to come over here and be successful than it is for a black man. Now look, let me just say this. When we talk about racism, We're actually talking about the unique situation of black racism, okay? That's why it's so easy for, 80% of the millionaires, whatever the stat you was that you used, or, 52% of all the CEOs are foreign born and blah, 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 blah. That's why, because there's something unique about black racism. Now, look, I'm not trying to convince anybody. I've had a lot of my white friends ask me questions about this. And what I say is, look, I'm not going to scold you. I'm not going to tell you that you're wrong. What I'm going to tell you is do what I did. Go read, educate yourself, read books, look at documentaries, listen to podcasts, learn what the history is. Before we can get to where we need to be in this country, if you want a solution, is, we have to re-examine everything. So today, PepsiCo announces that they're going to rename Aunt Jemima syrup. You know how, since I was a little kid, looking at that syrup with this black, mammy-looking woman with, a handkerchief on her head on the store shelves when I went shopping with my mother, do you know what that made me feel like? Or watching some black dude in cream of wheat, looking like a slave. Or driving through, suburban white neighborhoods with a black jockey on their lawn. The symbols of racism in this country, the fact that it was at our face and has been in our face for, my entire lifetime, the fact that, when I drive around, even in my neighborhood in Golden, and I see a Confederate flag, I tense up, okay? I've never been to Richmond, Virginia, and I don't plan to step foot in Richmond, Virginia until every Confederate statue on Memorial Avenue or whatever the hell it's called is down.
Why? Help me with this.
Oh man,
hang on.
I cannot. I took my mother.
No.
Listen, I took my mother, who's 90 years old, down to Albany, Georgia. She was born in right outside of Albany, Georgia. She's 90 years old. I took her back to meet some of her cousins for a family reunion, and we're going back to look at her childhood home. And I'm driving down the street, and it's Jefferson Davis Highway, and I go, why the hell are things here named after Confederate traitors? Why is that in my face? And I know the history, okay? Like, why do I have to have that in my face? These people were willing to die to keep my grandmother and my mother and potentially me enslaved. Like, why do I have to see that? Why is it in my face? And it shouldn't be. And what I really like about the movement right now is that they're tearing it down, they're getting rid of those symbols. Why? Because they know it was wrong.
They're symbols.
That's my take on it.
They're symbols. And here's where I get into my high horse about what happened to good liberals.
So that's why you're so tall.
That's
high
why.
horse.
High
Okay.
horse. There was a time when liberals believed in free speech, non-coercive speech. There was a time when the ACLU would go to bat for evil people like neo-Nazis, for even
I remember Skokie.
Yeah, they had a right to be as awful as they are and to express themselves. Mm-hmm. If some idiot wants to raise his flag, more power to him. The system should be there to go, he's wrong. But not to tear it down. I watched a video the other day of some college kid, and a black college kid ripped off his MAGA hat and wouldn't give it back. And it was like, no, you don't understand. And it's like, that's my hat. Let me go. The symbolism of it.
But you put so many things in your question, I can't keep up with all of them. Right.
Tearing down statues, I believe, is wrong.
That's different than taking off somebody's MAGA hat.
All right. But tearing down statues, what that does is it says, we're taking this bit of history as wrong or as good as it is, and we're tearing it down. I think that's a shame compared to adding something else.
I got that. So.
And as a newspaper man who chronicles things, what is the difference? Let me one point. Last one. When the Taliban came and blew up those religious statues from in Iraq, your heart went, oh my God!
Right.
Those were of right or wrong idols. Those have historic meaning.
But that's just John. You're usually a very logical person, like mixing in all that stuff.
Right. What's illogical about preserving?
There's nothing. Destroying a museum in Iraq versus pulling down a Confederate statue are two different things. It's two different things.
I've got a statue of Thomas Jefferson in this building right here.
Let me go back and
go
see
ahead.
if I can remember all the things you said. So
It's good to stare down statues. Let's stick with that one. I mean,
Okay.
it's just destruction of anything makes sense to me.
So the Supreme Court, in a landmark ruling, said, free speech, you have the right to, say certain things, but you don't have the right to cry fire in a crowded theater. Okay? Well, I don't think you have the right to put, racist symbols in the face of, black people in particular, who those symbols carry immense and terrorizing meanings, okay? I shouldn't have to walk down the street and see that, okay? I just shouldn't. I'm an American citizen. I should not have to do it. And by the way,
Talking about the guy in your neighborhood with a
I'm
flag?
talking about anybody that's doing that.
So you
okay?
think the law should take down his
What I'm
private
saying
flag?
is that's almost the equivalent of crying fire in a crowded theater. Okay, that's what I would say. There's a limit to that. If you want to put that in your house, cool. But if I'm walking down the street with my 2-year-old daughter, I don't want her having to see that. Okay, and I don't think you have the right to do it personally.
How can a newspaper man whose life is built around the First
I'm just
Amendment
telling you.
say that guy does not have the right to express himself?
Because I understand limits of the First Amendment. It's not absolute. Like everybody knows that.
It's his property on his house and his speech.
Yeah.
And
If I want to hang people in my front yard, it's cool.
that is a murder. That's not an expression of an opinion. Are you really saying that?
All right, if I want to put a picture of a lynching in my front yard, that's okay?
Yes, it's okay. It's
Okay.
terribly inappropriate. It's
Okay.
terribly hurtful, but
So-
it is free speech.
So if you want to be an absolutist about it, that's fine. But there are consequences that come with that. But let me go on. So like tearing down, historical relics, in a time of war, I don't think you should be able to do that. But like destroying a museum, destroying antiquities and stuff, it's not the same as taking down, symbols of hate. That's what those Confederate statues represent. Okay, that's what it represents. Like,
So did,
no, and the last thing I would just say is there was a great story. I think it was in the Washington Post today, because I've been thinking about this. Why are there no statues of Hitler? Okay, like in Germany. Like those people aren't stupid enough to do that. Okay. Like, we would sit over here and go,
because they don't have a First Amendment and they lost a war.
I'm just saying, that part of their history is something that they are ashamed of, okay, that they don't celebrate. They don't have Hitler Day and all that kind of nonsense, okay? They don't do that, right? And the reason they don't do that is because they're trying to create an inclusive society. They're trying to get away.
They're trying to engineer a society by taking away free expression.
Well, there's
Agreed.
a great story in the Washington Post that explains why there are no statues of Hitler. Okay? Am I saying that?
Because it's against the law in Germany.
Well, thank God they have that law.
It blows my mind that, again, a guy who's
I'm a black man.
You're a black man. I get
and
it.
I'm raising black kids.
You're black kids,
and I
but
want my kids to live in a society where they don't have to fear for their lives and they don't have to feel less than because we celebrate things that tried to subjugate us.
So,
as
in other words, the
people.
principle of free expression is secondary to somebody's comfort when it comes to walking down the street.
So I believe in what the Godfather says. I'm cool as long as your interests don't conflict with mine. Okay. And as long as you don't make me feel less than, as long as I'm not walking around.
Was the Skokie case decided in the
subjugated?
Was that the right decision?
Yeah, because
And if you're a Jewish man in Skokie, Illinois, who probably feels exactly the same way that you feel about your neighbor with that flag, how in the world do you explain it to the Jewish guy who says those people want to kill all of us?
Skokie wasn't about, hanging Nazi flags up in front of the State House.
It was a right to parade.
It was a
We're
right
talking
to,
about the flag in your neighborhood.
It was a right to protest, right?
And that guy has a flag in his house.
It was a momentary thing, and the Jewish community had the right to have a counter protest.
I just find the danger.
I understand the danger.
The danger of
You don't
any group.
You don't.
No, I'm not discounting the hate behind it. What I'm worried about is the principle that some group says, I find that insulting, dangerous, threatening to me. You don't have the right to express it. You don't have the right to say it. Keep it behind closed doors on a guy it's his own property. I believe when I said that there were good liberals, those good liberals were the ones who fought for those neo-Nazis. They put principle, and most of those lawyers were Jewish themselves.
Hey, look, I don't have a problem.
Incredible.
If the white supremacists want to have a demonstration down the middle of the street in Denver, I don't care.
So if I want to put, there's
no.
a flag behind you that is a Gadsden flag, which has been now somehow connected with the Tea Party movement. A lot of people think the Tea Party movement is a hateful movement and now somehow racist, which I
That
don't
flag has never been used to oppress me. It hasn't appeared at the homes of my forefathers when they were burning crosses.
And in 100 years,
that flag doesn't scare me.
In 100 years, when they look back and see those flags at Trump rallies, and somebody says, "No, those were used to oppress me. They didn't understand it at the time. Now we do." No, that's my property, and I should have the right to put up that flag.
There are certain symbols that carry more power than others, that create more danger than others, okay? There are some symbols that are so hateful, so egregious, so demeaning, like the swastika.
And you get to be the arbiter of that.
I'm not the arbiter of it. I'm just
you
saying,
want government to be the arbiter of who has speech and who doesn't. That scares the hell out of me.
I'm just saying, look, man, like if if my neighbor had a Confederate flag hanging from his house every day,
Yeah.
I'd ask him to take it down. I'd say, look, fly that in your house. I'm cool with that.
And if you
and if he said no, and we managed to avoid a conflict, a physical conflict, then I'd have to make the decision whether I wanted to live next to somebody that espoused that kind of what I consider hate, or live with it.
And if you
I
had
don't think the latter would be possible.
If you had a
for
Black
me.
Panthers flag out,
Black Panthers flag has never been used to oppress white people.
I'm not saying that. If you had a Black Panthers flag and he found that threatening or insulting, or he didn't like it, and he was able to get enough people to say, that's wrong, you got to take it down.
I would say that, like, on what grounds? Because you're
on your grounds?
But no, what grounds? Because you personally don't like the Black Panther Party.
Because he feels threatened by it.
Yeah, but there's no historical context to that feeling, okay? Like, the difference between the Nazi flag and the Confederate flag is that those were symbols of official oppression.
I feel the exact same way when I see people.
Do you see that?
I see it.
All right.
I feel the exact same way when I see progressives walking around with a hammer and sickle. A hammer and sickle under that flag has oppressed more people, killed more people, purged and committed genocide, much more so than the Confederate flag and the Nazi flag put together. But yet, you walk around at those protests, you see guys walking around with hammer and sickles. If I had my way, I would ban those too. And before you know it, we're on a circle of banning speech. Trust me, I'm saying this, take it for what it's worth.
No, it's an intellectual argument. To me, it's an intellectual argument.
I find that symbol so hateful, so disgusting, so repugnant, so dangerous, that it should be wiped from the face of the earth. But I can't say the government's job is to do that.
Look, I understand that, okay? Like, if you take every argument to its infinite degree, I mean, like, okay.
No, what's the difference? You said Confederate flag, I said hammer and sickle.
The hammer and sickle in parts of Eastern Europe probably have the same symbolic power to elicit fear and terror as the Confederate flag. But I bet you the Confederate flag, if you flew it in Russia, doesn't mean anywhere near. They probably don't give a damn about it.
See, and that goes to a collectivist versus individualist point of view. From an individualist point of view, let me tell you, I find that flag offensive as hell.
I actually understand that.
But just because there's more people...
And if I were your neighbor, and I was flying that flag because I just happen to like the colors, and you came over to me and you said, hey, you know what?
Yeah, but that's not what you said. You wanted a law to take down the flag.
I didn't say anything about the hammer and sickle.
The Confederate flag. You said that guy
why.
on his private property.
Explain why.
We're going to go around in circles.
Okay, no.
Let's get...
Am I boring you?
You've always bored me. That's why I only talk to you when I'm drinking.
Okay.
Let's get to the larger issue. We've touched a bit on free speech. We've touched on the police issue. You and I are going to come to a lot of agreements on police reforms, I think.
Yes.
Not all of them. For me, police unions, the role of policing, and I will accept a lot of the things I don't know that you tell me about relationships with the police. Here's where I really want to get into it, which is I want a solution, and I want a solution for a bubbling racial problem that's popping up. What I hear when I mostly hear about racial problems is we want an expanded welfare state. We want to have some sort of distribution. We're going to take from here, and to make amends for sins of the past, we're going to give to there. And by the end of this year, the reparations debate, I think, is going to be in full swing. I wouldn't be surprised if it plays a large part in the presidential race. And I've got many issues with that.
I know.
But let's talk about that. The drunken question. What the hell do you want, man? Give me.
How many times have you asked me that question, John?
What do you want?
You've asked me that question
and you've given,
so many times.
And can I give an approximation of what I've heard? Which
I thought those were private discussions.
All right, then I won't. You give me the approximation.
So you've asked me, and other people have asked what I want. What I want. What I want is a open, full disclosure discussion about slavery and the residual racism that has existed in this country for 400 years. Like Reconstruction lasted for less than 10 years. And then, that period after that ushered in Jim Crow, which was not officially overthrown until 1965, and there were still vestiges of it even beyond that. So I want a full discussion of that. One of the things I liked about what happened in South Africa, and everybody talks about the saying that, Nelson Mandela, he forgave the white people, and why can't everybody be like that after being in prison for 30 years and all that? But what they also had was a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, where they uncovered all the facts of apartheid and all the impacts of it. And only until you can sort of acknowledge the harm that was done and try to make some type of recompense can you move forward. Like, it wasn't just, hey, all's forgiven. It was a process that they worked through. We never had that process. So one, I want the process. And you and I have read books like The Half That's Never Been Told. And I remember everybody sitting around my table, because John and I are in the same book club, saying, I didn't know that. I didn't know that happened. I don't want to hear any more about it, but I didn't know that happened, right? So first, I want a truth and reconciliation type thing. The second thing I want...
No, you said first the discussion.
First the discussion.
Let me tell you, I want to end the discussion.
I know you do. Truth and reconciliation, and then, just sort of figuratively, I would like my 40 acres and a mule. Now, I've told you that before. And if the 4 million enslaved African Americans, because many of them were born on this soil and plantations, if the 4 million enslaved people had been given their 40 acres and a mule, I think roughly, if I recall what I've read, that would translate in today's dollars as something like $4.3 trillion. That was a transfer of wealth, okay?
All right, so I heard three things. One, conversation. Two, proper accounting. Three, reparations. You can put it in any.
That's true.
All right, so
that's fair.
Let me go with those three things.
Now, I'm not saying that like you asked me what I want. I'm not out here advocating any particular thing, but yeah, I'm trying to have an intellectual discussion with you.
Right. I am convinced that on one side of this, the conversation will never end, and the conversation doesn't want to be ended. I'm telling you, that's all I've heard. I feel like the guy who, wait a second, I wasn't alive during this, but I've been spoon-fed it in every Hollywood movie, in every book, in every classroom. I've had it. And
yeah,
I'll put it out there. We got to be careful that if it's pushed too hard, you know what you're going to do? You're going to get yourself 4 more years of Trump, because a lot of us are just tired of hearing it.
Right. You think that's why people would elect Trump?
No, I think it's a whole bunch of different things. Okay. Interestingly, I think that more blacks were voting for Trump than any other Republican president, because, and if the government shutdown over Corona didn't happen, even more would, because black Americans' unemployment was at an all-time low. Yeah, people at the lower end of the economic scale were getting raises at a higher level than those people at the higher level. The kind of things that Bernie and all the socialists promise were being delivered thanks to the marketplace.
Yeah.
The accounting is an interesting one, because like anybody who's been through a good, ugly divorce knows, there's a million ways to do accounting.
Sure.
And and so the devils are in the details. So wait a second, does the guy who just became an American who came over here from Mexico, he's got to give away his tax money to give money to Michael Jordan? No, I don't think that's going to fly.
Right.
The people and families who've already paid the ultimate price from the Civil War, if the burden of slavery goes through, then the benefit of people who have paid so much in devastation for the Civil War, well, do their ancestors have to pay for it? I mean, we can talk about all this all the time.
And we've talked about this, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's complicated, right? But the one thing is that, America is made up of really a lot of smart people, that we can figure out how to be
Really?
fair.
I'm gonna.
Well, we can figure out how to be fair. We can.
Fair
I'm just saying we can figure it out. But look,
Fair, like good looking, is a subjective term. And so I hear fair, I hear socialism.
Well, I know, but like, that's more of a political statement than
Taking
than a
money,
practical
taking
matter.
money from here and giving money over there is a political and ugly process.
Yeah, no doubt about it. But what I was really trying to get to is, rather than sort of looking at it through an individual prism of accountability, where I'm actually reaching into your pocket to make recompense for something that you weren't alive for or whatever, and we're not going to get into the benefits, the residual benefits over generations that just sort of wash down the hill. We're not getting into that. This is a governmental issue.
That's what I just said. It's politics.
It's it's a governmental issue, because the institution of slavery was a matter of policy. It was a matter of policy. And Jim Crow was enforced legally. That's why they got de jure segregation. It's a matter of policy. It's a matter of law. The Supreme Court was a part of that. Our state legislatures were a part of that. The U.S. Senate was a part of that. We had segregationist presidents. So there's an institutional responsibility. And what I really like about what the young people in this country are sort of saying right now is, like, a lot of progress got made, during the civil rights movement and the anti-war movement and many other movements to, empower women and, LGBTQ rights. But there's a lot of unfinished business, and this is the generation that's going to try to get that finished, And I'm encouraged by that.
And if it is to move towards a colorblind society, I join them in it. If it is moving towards a politically dictated, engineered society where some elite, some committee, some very smart people, as you put it, are the ones to decide what flags can be raised on private property, who can say what, who gets to keep what, who gets to pay what, then it becomes something very un-American and not to the founding visions. So in front of this building, we've got a statue of Thomas Jefferson, the Independence Institute. He did the Declaration of Independence. I'm always fascinated by his words, because his words were bigger than his tiny little human brain. In that, when he said all men are created equal, with certain unalienable rights.
Except for black people.
Except for black people. But it's almost as if he didn't invent that, he discovered it. And that truth it's kind of like Pythagoras came up with his theorem. A squared, B squared. This is a truth.
Yes.
The truth that all men are created equal is a truth, even though his pitiful little mind, given his time and history, couldn't see that black guy was man and therefore equal. The truth of that principle was bigger than his own time. And now
nobody debates that. Nobody debates that. But look, I'm not giving Jefferson a pass. Okay,
you don't have to give him a pass. All I want to say is that the words
I don't care
are
about
true.
the size of his brain and all that nonsense. What I'm saying, what I think when I think of Jefferson, I think, you know what, Jefferson, John Adams. Okay, everybody wants to say he was a person of his time. Well, so was John Adams. Okay, he didn't behave that way.
Two different
I'm just
countries.
saying, not every white man that lived during that period was a slaveholder.
True.
Not
But
every white man believed that all
two
men were
different countries,
created. No,
we don't.
There were some white men that did not believe that all men are created equal, except black people.
Right.
Okay.
Agreed.
So I'm not making any excuses for him. Look, I think Jefferson did great things. He's a great American and stuff, and I would never support taking down his statue.
Really?
No, I wouldn't. I think, like
Because lots of universities
I've heard that.
are tearing down those. And by the way,
Somebody's tearing down a statue of Thomas Jefferson?
they're not tearing them down, but they are removing them, particularly from politically
Where?
correct
Do you
colleges.
know where?
Yeah, I don't know it off that, but I can. And by the way, if you want to give me your Thomas Jefferson statues, I will take them. We'll have a garden here of them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's why taking down Jefferson Davis's statue.
Totally different than Thomas Jefferson.
Yeah, he lost.
Correct.
But also, if there's a statue of Genghis Khan or a statue of Napoleon, there's been enough time given that we look at that and go, that's kind of stupid. Whereas this is closer. But at some point, that statue of Jefferson Davis will be looked at as a piece of history and not a piece of pain. And I think it should be preserved that way.
Jefferson Davis will never be seen as anything but a purveyor of pain and racism.
And Genghis Khan will be.
Come on, come on.
Believe it or not, I'm not going to make this argument for myself, but here it is. Beyond slavery, the political argument of states' rights versus a strong central state was a big part of the Civil War as well. And because of slavery, we can never have that debate of state power versus federal power. We love Lincoln because we have to love Lincoln. I don't love Lincoln as much as everybody else. I mean, I love him for what he did on emancipation. I love what he did on all these things. But also, it was the first big collection of centralized DC power. Whenever there's a crisis, centralized government gets more power. Diffused power goes away.
Right.
Same thing happened the next World War. Same thing happened in the Depression. Same thing happened in World War II. Same thing happened with LBJ.
Yeah, LBJ.
Same thing happened now. Same thing happened after 9/11.
Sure.
And so we keep seeing this. So somebody will look at, in years to come, in 100 years, look at Jefferson Davis or whoever the thought leader was,
Yeah.
and go, besides that huge frickin' ugliness, that doesn't, he did this, he believed in that, he believed in this. When you look at if you've actually read the Constitution of the Confederate States, it actually builds in some other reforms that aren't in the United States Constitution. So there's something there. What I'm saying is that statue will not always be hate. It will be a historic oddity that people learn from. We still have paintings of King George. He was a tyrant we kicked out of here.
So can I ask you a question? Do you think that the uniform of the Ku Klux Klan 1,000 years from now will be looked at as a symbol of anything other than hate and terror?
No, I think it will be seen that, but it'll be seen in historic eyes, in the same way that Pharaoh's army uniform might look to the way we look at it today. And therefore, as a historian, you shouldn't burn it. You keep it knowing that's happened.
So I actually like some of the.
Am I?
You make sense. I don't accept that symbols of hate can be transformed into symbols of love just by time.
No, I never said that.
I know, but I'm just saying I don't see that transformation happening, or reassessment of. I don't think we'll ever say, oh, you know what, the Nazi symbol was like the donkey in the Democratic Party. I don't think we'll ever say that. But I like some of the ideas where some of these statues that are on memorial boulevards, and by the way, they weren't erected in 1867, right after the Civil War. They were erected in 1921 as symbols of terror. I think
that's the lesson.
I think they belong like in a museum or something like that. If you want to go and look at that statue, and so you can get a good look at what Jefferson Davis looked like and all that. I think that's fine. But, should it be in my face or should it be in my kids' face or my great-grandkids? No, I don't think so. That's all I'm saying.
I think the way to solve that is with addition. That is, you put up different statues, you put up more statues. All right, getting back to the 3 points. You said...
I have not bored you yet.
No, you never bore me. In the many years we've been friends, you've never bored me.
Okay.
Which is amazing, because you've been wrong throughout all that time.
And you've been so irritating, but...
Even if you agree with me, you find me irritating. That's you want to keep the conversation going, I want to end it. You want accounting, I don't know how it can be done properly. And then finally, you want reconciliation. Let's finish up on this theme.
Okay.
there was reparations for Japanese Americans. The money went to those Japanese Americans who were wrongly incarcerated. They were put in concentration camps. It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
But they got the reparations. No one who was enslaved is alive to receive those reparations. So we've got to come up with a theorem of well, he had a kid and he had a kid and he had a kid, and the institutional thing. Therefore, it's going to happen.
Correct.
Even if we came up with that system, which I don't think is even workable, I worry about the amnesty problem.
Yeah.
It goes like this. Ronald Reagan said, all right, we got all these illegals here. We're going to give them amnesty. But from now on, there'll be no more letting anybody in. Well, that never worked.
Right.
All right. And if you said to me, all right, we're going to take all this great society stuff, this wealth, this transfer that has gone largely to minority communities, and we're going to stop it, and instead we're going to do one big bulk payment. Everybody gets their 40 acres and a mule, whatever the equivalent is now. You're telling me that welfare as we know it goes away, or these other wealth transfers that keep growing and growing and growing go away? I don't believe it.
I mean, it's hard to believe that right now because we don't execute very well when it comes to policy, right? I mean, we just don't. Right. So yeah, I know it's hard, so, and I don't know exactly, what the answers are or anything like that. But the difference between sort of making restitution to the Japanese Americans for the internment camps, it was a limited period of time. It was an identifiable group that had been harmed. And I think the country had grown some in terms of, sort of understanding the damage and the unfairness of those kinds of acts, and that if you take somebody's home and you take their possessions and, rob them of their livelihoods, that there was a real harm, and in real time you can make up for it. Like, I just think the country in, the 1930s or 40s and what it was like in 1865 or even 1925 is different. It was easier to sort of figure out how to do that because it was clearly wrong. I mean, presidents have said that and historians too. So it's kind of different. Like I understand the complexities.
I mean, it was wrong not because presidents or historians said it.
Yeah, it was just wrong, right?
Wrong.
But just because it's hard doesn't mean that it can't be done. That's what I say when it comes to sort of figuring out how to redress, centuries of subjugation, abuse, and theft of labor, and therefore theft of wealth. There is something real about that, and we got to come to terms with it. And hopefully, smart people can get together and figure out how to address that.
How far back would you go on reparations? In other words,
look, those are really great questions.
Yeah, I know. We're going to have a discussion because that's all we do is have a frickin' discussion. Let's have a long discussion. That's what we have academics for. What about the black man in Africa who traded their fellow black men from Africa and sold them out? Do they have a responsibility to pay something? Does Europe have something because they facilitated this trade long before we were a nation? Do they have something to pay for this?
It's a really interesting question, right?
Yeah, we should have a discussion.
Well, no, we shouldn't have a discussion. We should just understand history, right? So, like, if you read, some of the books here, one of the reasons that slavery was so intractable and so difficult to defeat is that it wasn't just an American phenomenon, right? It was a global phenomenon. The British Empire, profited from the cotton industry that was, quadrupled and, on the backs of black slaves, right? Like the cotton gin just made them work harder. It just shortened their lifespan. So it was a global problem. Maybe there should be a global solution. Maybe it should go through the UN, and a number of governments should contribute to a fund to sort of make up for the labor that was stolen and the wealth that was denied. Who knows? I don't know.
And how far back do you want to go?
I don't know. I'm just saying, let's get some smart people in the room and talk.
Slaves built most of Egypt.
Slaves built America. We only talk about America.
Oh, so you're only going to go that far back because our white privilege comes from European white privilege, which comes from slavery as well. There should be a celebration of how this country bravely took on that issue. And while other countries
I think there is.
I don't see it.
I think
Again,
there is.
for the 55 years that my mouth has been duct taped because I'm a racist and my ears have been held open.
I don't think your mouth could ever be duct taped.
But I tell you, If I got a dime for every time I've been called a racist, and we're now immune to it. We don't care. We just don't care anymore because we're tired of it. That's why you keep saying, want a discussion? You're like, go. Discuss all you like.
Right.
I've had enough.
So why have you kept me here for like an hour and a half?
No, it's only been an hour.
Well, why did you keep me here for an hour if you
Because
didn't really want to talk?
They need to hear. They need to hear you. So they can go, oh, let's talk about it some more.
Right.
I want an end to the conversation.
I hear you.
I want somebody put an offer on the table and say, if we accept this offer, the conversation is over and we can go back to creating jobs.
Yeah.
And by the way, the best reparation.
Jobs where people get paid, you mean?
No.
Not like the jobs we had in the 1700s, 1800s for black people.
Listen, we've both been married. We both know what involuntary servitude is like.
Yes, we do.
No, in order for everyone's life to get better, for opportunities to happen, black or white, you need a vibrant economy. And
No
I
question.
worry that the Black Lives Matter is working counter to that. That if we just take this money and destroy the engine that could actually uplift all these folks, all of us, that's what scares the hell out of me.
Yeah. Well, look, I think whatever we do going forward, I don't think we want to scare people. I don't think we want to scold people. I don't.
Sorry.
I don't think
Sorry.
that.
Almost had a spit take on that
Well,
one.
I'm glad you didn't wet up my shirt.
I've had 55 years of scolding. White guilt.
I think the white scolding, white guilt thing should be over. And
Tell Hollywood that, will you? Tell the media that, will you?
Well, hopefully they'll listen to your program. I'm going to put it on all my social networks. I'll try to get it to them. I'll try.
Katzenberg will take on it.
Yeah.
Any last thoughts on this? Man, I appreciate every time we've had this conversation over the years, I learn more and I'm appreciative. You learn nothing because you don't listen. Put a cherry on top of this. What?
The cherry on top would be what my 16-year-old daughter said. You know, after explaining to me the stellar attributes of the Gen Z generation and all the things that are wrong with my generation. She just told me that we're going to finish the business that you didn't get a chance to finish. I actually think that if you look at the lineage of the current protest, it really starts with Parkland. I really do. I think that was a turning point in America. And those kids, who suffered the terror of that school shooting said, look, what we've been doing is not working. The NRA, your generation is scared of them. We ain't. And we're going to take on these sacred cows, but the next generation of kids are not going to be walking around scared to go to school. And
hopefully they'll be packing heat.
Well, maybe they will be packing heat. And I think that movement sort of fed anger and frustration about the inability to change other parts of American society. And so when that match was lit in Ferguson with Michael Brown and then the whole damn box of matches got lit up until last Friday, more and more people joined that movement. And Black Lives Matter is a big part of that movement. But the thing that makes this different and the thing that probably makes it unstoppable is that the fuel is of a whole bunch of different hues. And it makes a huge difference. I'm looking forward to what this generation and other generations to come, what they accomplish, because I think that we've raised them to be this way. And I know some of my white friends who talk about how their kids have integrated lives, that their friends are black and Asian and Japanese and they're handicapped and all of that. And they still live fairly non-integrated lives, right? They're happy that they've raised kids that are that way, and so I pin a lot of hopes on that generation. I'm impressed and proud.
There's no statistic about bigotry. So how are we doing on the bigotry scale today? Well, Dow Jones on bigotry today went up 5 points. There's nothing there. The only thing I've been able to see that's close to this are the census numbers on interracial marriage. Mm-hmm. That, race relations are worse than they've ever been, I keep hearing. But if you look at the exponential growth, people hate each other's races so much, they're making babies with them.
That's right.
That's,
Isn't that something?
over time, this issue gets bred out.
Right.
The evil white overlords. Well, in my lifetime, if I live long enough, white guy's going to become the minority. I don't care about that, so long as the principles.
You're rich.
I'm rich. I'm rich. By the way, somebody gave me the scotch. I can't afford it. You see the car I drive. I don't care being the minority as long as the principles of free speech, property rights, low taxation, low regulation, as long as those things give equal opportunity, I don't care.
Right.
I worry that in order to solve this problem after this conversation that you just will not stop having, that those things go away. That's what worries me.
Yeah.
And
I do get
I don't mind
that.
being the minority.
Yeah.
Bring on the minority.
Well, maybe the next time we talk, I'll tell you what that's like.
Actually, that would be good.
Yeah, I'll tell you what it's like.
I mean, I've had several experiences, not like you. I've had several experiences where I'm like the one white guy in a room full of black guys.
Yeah.
Like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
I get it.
Yeah.
I get it. What drives me crazy is that I think a lot of the reforms that would change that are the ones that we free marketers espouse. Educational choice.
Sure.
Here's the money to go to a good private school, not to the lousy government. Here's the money to buy a car so you're not waiting for the damn government bus.
Right.
Here's the money to choose your health care plan, not that you have to take everybody else's socialized health care plan.
Absolutely.
But what I see is that the Black Lives Matter crowd, at large, prefer the socialized answers rather than the go make your own decisions.
So give the movement time. These young 20-year-old kids and 18-year-old kids, yes, you do. I think we're going to see their thinking evolve. I think it's already evolving. The old sort of alignment that you complain about, I think is
being
also
manifested in speech codes on campus.
It's also part of what's being challenged. So
speech codes on campus. Shut them up, take down their flags.
Yeah, right.
All right. Hey, Greg, thank you so much.
John, cheers. Great to be with you.
Always. If you enjoyed that conversation, by all means, click one of these other great programs. We have the best conversations with the most fascinating Coloradans. And subscribe to our channel. Just click down below and hit that little bell button too. You don't want to miss a single show.